Hey everybody, welcome back to Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast covering your Las Vegas Raiders and your guides through this adventure. Yes, it's an audio and video adventure. If you're a Raiders fan, the guy I love doing this show with, his name, Mr. Moe Moton, he's a senior NFL writer covering the league for the Bleacher Report. Yes, and not only that, he's a Raiders columnist up on sportsnot.com, where you can find me as well. I am an editor, writer there. And you can follow Mo on x.com at Moe Moton, Moemoton. I am at LV Gully. We record this show on Wednesday evening, and I just want to give a shout out and offer my condolences. My alma mater, UNLV, of course, you've heard it in the news. The active shooter gentleman, unfortunately, I call him a gentleman. He's not a gentleman. He's a piece of crap. Killed 3 people on the campus of UNLV, where my son currently goes to school, where I went to school. My son was not on campus. He is safe. Everyone I know there is safe, but there are 3 families grieving tonight, and want to send out our best to them and offer our thoughts and prayers to them as well. Just a horrific day. I mean, you go to school to accomplish your dreams, to learn, and you have to deal with something like that. So I'm sure we'll find out more, but my alma mater is hurting tonight, and just want to send out my best to them before we get into the Raider talk. All right, so we talk about the Raiders. The Raiders, Mo, here we go. Last 5 games of the season. It starts this weekend at Allegiant Stadium as they host the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are 6-6. The Raiders stand at 5-7. Both teams technically still alive in the playoff race, right? The Raiders would need a lot of help. The Vikings need help too, by the way. But it all starts with one game. You got to win that game. You got to play your schedule and do what you can. When we look at these 5 games, we've talked about Antonio Pierce. He's got 5 games left to show that he can be the permanent head coach. Champ Kelly has 5 games left, although I wrote a piece that you can see on Thursday on sportsnot.com where I argue Champ Kelly probably and should be the permanent GM. I've already made the call in my mind. I know we talked about it the last show, but that's where I'm at. But he's got an opportunity. And then there are players on this team that have opportunities. But when you look at this, what can this team prove, right? We went in saying 6, 7, 8 wins. They stand currently at 5 with 5 to go. Is this team sort of where we thought it would be, even though the games and the situation is obviously different than we anticipated in the preseason?
They're about where I thought they would be at this point in the season. I don't know exactly what I had their record after 12 games when I had my Bleacher Report live when the schedule dropped. But if you remember in that initial prediction, I said the Raiders would go 7-10, and then I kind of went to, I guess, 6-11. After all that happened in the offseason, I didn't feel too optimistic, and then you had the Chandler Jones saga going on. So I just felt like, me personally, I look at a team in the offseason, if there's a lot of noise, and what I mean by noise is distractions or some off the field matters or things going on, like you saw with Antonio Brown a few years ago. Yeah. When I see that, it makes me nervous about a team's win-loss projection. But I think this is about where I expected them to be at this point of the year. Now, I will say they're probably better than a lot of other people projected them to be. We've had people on this show say they're only going to win 4 games. They're only going to win 3 games, right? Now, they didn't know that Josh McDaniels would be ousted as the head coach and they would bring up Antonio Pierce. But I said it during the offseason. This team has enough talent to win the football games. To me, the question was, do they have the coaching staff to develop talent once those players come in and walk through those headquarters? And to my, I don't want to say to my credit, but apparently they didn't, because they let go of Josh McDaniels before midseason, and now you have Antonio Pierce in charge and Bo Hardegree calling the plays. So for the rest of the way, I would say there's a lot to prove for veterans and young players.
Yeah, there is, and I'm with you there. Look, I picked 7 games. I think I said the ceiling was 9, and clearly I just don't think they get to 9. With 5 left and who they have, I don't see it. That might be pessimistic for some of you who are overly optimistic, and I understand that, and that's okay. I'll be glad to be wrong. But that's where I see it. I can see them reaching the 7 win. I think it could possibly be 6. It could be, I think 2 out of the next 5 is very realistic. Past that is a bonus in my view. And to your point about the coaching staff developing players, so you get your Antonio Pierce, you get handed a really tough situation, a tough assignment, right? he aces the first test, which is to get the team unified again, to get the team focused, to feel good about the locker room, their leadership, and all that. That can't be underscored. He deserves every ounce of credit he gets for doing that. It's a remarkable thing and the sign of a true leader. Then you get to what he talked about in the press conference on Wednesday. Antonio Pierce said, look, they asked him, what do you need to prove over this next few games? He says, look, at the end of the day, it's about wins and losses. We need to win football games. And this is the second time he said that in 2 press conferences. So Antonio Pierce is very self-aware. He's a really smart dude, and I think a good football coach. But he knows he's got to win some games. And so I would anticipate over the next 5 games, Mo, that we won't see a repeat. At least I'm hoping. We won't see a repeat of being very conservative. Instead, you got to take some risks because guess what? You got nothing to lose at this point. You have to be able to try to turn things. If things aren't working, you can't stick with them just because you think that's the system. You're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to do things. And I think that gives him more opportunity. Fortune favors the bold, right, Mo?
That's correct. I go back to the piece that Deshaun of The Athletic wrote, and he said, Raiders have to play like they have nothing to lose. And that means, as you said, taking risks. But what did I say last week about results matter, right? Remember, we talked about this, and I love you, Murph, but there are a lot of people out there that say, give Antonio Pierce the job now, no matter what happens. And what did I say? I said, results matter. And Antonio Pierce acknowledged it again, that results matter. Regardless of what his situation is, what he has or doesn't have on that roster, the experience he does have or doesn't have, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if you finish the year at 6-11, you finish the year at 7-10, you're probably not going to get the job. That's just how it works. It's a results-based business. It's that simple. He has to win football games, and he understands that.
Right. And listen, again, I've said it over and over again, and I'm not going to go deep into it because we've talked a lot about it over the last 2 previous shows. Fans love the guy. I get it, but it's a results-based business. You got to do it, right? If this show wasn't doing as well as it was with downloads, for example, Mo and I wouldn't be here because guess what? Odyssey's going to say, hey, guys, we like you. You're nice guys. That Mo guy's handsome and he's Midtown Mo and everything, but we're going to have to let you go because you're not succeeding. You're not winning. You're not putting points on the board. Well, luckily we are putting points on the board, so that's good. But I think he's got to do that too. If you look at also what they can prove here, remember, especially when you're on interim staff, everybody knows that they're being watched because they could be, if Mark Davis decides that Antonio Pierce is not the direction and he goes to hire somebody else, whoever that may be, all the other coaches, okay, are looking for jobs. That's just the way it goes. I know people said, they were arguing with me on X. Well, Al Davis used to retain coaches. Look, this is not Al Davis. And it's not 1970 or 85. This doesn't work that way, right? So now, could Antonio Pierce stay? Perhaps in some role. I don't know. But the coaching staff who comes in, if he's not the coach, is going to decide who that is. So all these other coaches are auditioning too for their next role as well, Mo, right? So your Bo Hardigree, yeah, you never called plays, but you now are going to be looking for your job. So you want to show that, hey, over the last 5 games, here's what I did. Because when you go in to have that interview, you're going to say, look, our offense scored 16.8. Over the last 5, we scored 25.3 or whatever the number is. So you want to do that. Antonio Pierce, the same thing. Patrick Grant, everybody's playing for their job. That translates on the field too. If we look at these last 5 games, we're going to start with the veterans. We're going to talk about the young guys in the next segment. But as veterans go, who has the most to prove down the stretch here?
That's a good question. I talked about young guys, but if we're going to focus on veterans, I will say let's start with the interior defensive line, right? So that's the weak part of the Raiders defense right now. I would say Bilal Nichols. Now I've been harsh on Bilal Nichols last year. He's made more plays this year, but is he a guy that you look at as he's a foundational building block? I would say right now the answer is no. Jerry Tillery's had some boneheaded issues, penalties in the past. He's still on the field playing a significant amount of snaps. We'll see if they re-sign him again. Does he get another 1-year deal? Does he get a multi-year deal from the Raiders? I highly doubt it. But we'll see in these last 5 games if he can show something on the interior and provide a pass rush. If we're working our way back, I would say Devon Diablo has been fine. But always remember if you're going to bring in a new coaching staff, you're going to bring in a new GM, they might want their guys. So even if you had a solid year, unless you had a Pro Bowl or All Pro year, your spot isn't safe.
Right.
And I
Right.
would say, well, where Robert Spillane is clearly having his best year and could be a Pro Bowler by the end of the season, Divine Diablo has got to continue to play at a either a decent or a high level because he's not guaranteed the spot. And a lot of people will hear this say, "Well, Mo, Divine Diablo has been playing well," and I acknowledge that. But again, unless you're a Pro Bowl All Pro player, your spot isn't safe under a new regime. You gotta play at a high level for a coach staff to say he's not our guy, but we're gonna make him our guy
Yeah.
because he played well
Right.
last year. So one more name I want to bring up: Jermaine Illuminari. He's been splitting snaps
Yeah.
with Dale Mumford in and out of the lineup. Where is he going to fit in all this? I assume the Raiders are going to draft the right tackle, whoever is making the calls. But do they keep Jermaine Illuminari as a utility offensive lineman? Is he that guy to just play multiple spots as a backup? Or does he show something in these last, 5 weeks that shows, yeah, I'm still a starter. I had a rough part of the season earlier in the middle part of the year, but I'm still a starting caliber player, albeit maybe a low end starter, but a starter nonetheless.
Right. And I agree with all of those selections. I think that if you look at there are some veterans too. I mean, Illuminor is the one guy that came to mind for me as well. If you look at the rest of the offense, the only other guy you could really talk about is Josh Jacobs. And what does he have to prove? I think he just has to keep running the ball if he gets the opportunity to do so. And our good friend Phil Robinson of the Phils, I made a steak bet dinner with him. I don't know if you saw it. But he's guaranteeing that Josh Jacobs will be back and he'll sign a long-term deal. And I said, I'll bet you a steak dinner because I don't think it's happening. I just don't. Not that I don't like Josh Jacobs. It goes back to the original conversation here.
Phil Robinson of the Unfiltered Truth over there with Phil Jones. That's an interesting bet.
Yes, it was Phil Jones. Excuse me, I misspoke.
Okay, Phil
Robinson.
Jones, the
Yes.
other Phil of
the other
the
Phil.
Unfiltered Truth.
Yes.
But that, I don't know what's going to happen with Josh Jacobs simply because it depends on the head coach, right? So if Antonio Pierce stays on, there's a good chance you're going to be buying a steak dinner for Phil Jones because
I'm happy to.
he's already said that the run game is the bread and butter of that offense, and he loves some Josh Jacobs. But if Antonio Pierce is out of the door, then I would say all bets are off. The other guy I want to bring up, a notable player on the offense, is Hunter Renfrow. Yeah. Now the Raiders can designate him as a post-June 1 cut and save $11.9 million about that. If they release him next year, I don't think they will. But if you're Hunter Renfrow and you have Trey Tucker, who's a rookie, a speedster who can stretch the field, something you don't do. And then you have Devante Adams, who's a star. And then you have Jacoby Myers, who's arguably the Raiders' best offseason acquisition on offense. You have to be thinking, where do I fit in? Long-term, short-term. So I think I think he has something to prove that he could be still a productive number 2 type wide receiver. And a lot of people will push back and say, we love Hunter Renfrow. And I get that. But if you're looking at the construction of the roster, Devante Adams and Jacoby Myers, to me, are set. And then Trey Tucker, obviously on a rookie deal, who could do something that none of the other receivers on that roster can do. And if you're Hunter Renfrow, with a bloated salary at this point compared to your production, you have to be worried about your roster spot right now.
Yeah, and I look at Hunter Renfrow, and I think that he needs to have a good 5 games, not for him, but for the Raiders, because then he has some trade value. Like you said, they can cut him post-June 1 and save $11 million. But if he can go out on fire, that would help them because they might be able to get some capital back in a trade for him. And then the only other guy I would mention is Devante Adams, because if Devante Adams isn't moved, fine, he stays where he is. He's great. What else can you say? But then you look at that receiving core. Jacoby Myers has been very good too, but they lack the speed. Outside of Trey Tucker, they got nobody. The Raiders need that speed. They need some more speed. And like you said, depending who the coach is and what system they bring in, if it's Antonio Pierce and it kind of stays status quo with obviously some new changes and I'm sure a new offensive coordinator, it could change, but maybe stay a little bit more minded like they are now. Otherwise, though, I think that team is, if you look at them, and I know Raider fans will kind of like, what are you talking about? But it's true. When you look at other top teams in the league, they are slow as hell. They need speed, okay? And for a tight end, Michael Mayer is actually pretty quick, so I'm not even including him. But they're going to have to they need some speed on the outside in addition to Trey Tucker in the slot. So So you're right. So I think that's not about veteran players. That's more about needs. But that Hunter Renfrow conversation, as well as Jacoby Myers, his deal, what do you do? I mean, there's a lot to happen there. And I think we're going to go into the offseason not knowing, because unless they've named Antonio Pierce the coach by the last game, we're not going to know what system's there and what their needs are. So it'll be interesting. All right. Well, there you go. That's the first segment. That's what we talked about, the veterans there. And when we come back, Mo did a Bleacher Report live yesterday, and he had a subject on there that I really liked. The conversation was great. So we're going to pick it up here on this show, which is about young players and who needs to show that they can play out over the next 5 games, and who is that? And by the way, also of the young guys, who's already kind of earned their spot, do you think? Who do you think is safe and has proven that they belong not only on the Raiders, but in the NFL? We're going to come back here. You're listening to Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. Also heard on the air, a hearty hello to our listeners in Las Vegas on The Bet. We're coming back right after this. Welcome back, Silver and Black Today, listening to us on the air, on the radio, on The Bet in Las Vegas. Thanks for being with us. Also, we are an Odyssey original podcast. That's right. So if you're listening to us on the radio right now, just pick up your phone wherever you get your audio. Do us a favor, subscribe to the show. And we are here all week long. So not only do you get the show here on Saturday, but you also get the show all week long, like on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Wednesdays and post games. So make sure you do that when you get a chance. Moe Moton, Scott Gulbransen back with you. We are talking Raiders football as we get set for the Raiders versus the Vikings on Sunday at Allegiant Stadium as we enter Week 14 in the NFL. This segment, we're going to talk about young players, right? Raiders have a ton of young guys on the roster, but how have they done? Who must show progress? Who has to, over these last 5 games, prove that they belong? Mo, let's start there. Let's start on the offense. You mentioned one guy, I think, that you talked about on your Bleacher Report Live, and that, of course, is Trey Tucker. Trey Tucker, I thought when he was drafted, was a project, and I think he is still. I think he has the ability, he has the speed. He is the Raiders' one speedy dude. He needs to still develop better route running. He still needs to catch the ball a little better here and there, but he's made some spectacular catches this year. He's done better than I thought he would. How do you look at him, and what does he got to do over these next 5 games so that the Raiders, or whoever's coaching the Raiders and the GM of the Raiders, looks at him and says, we got to build around him, versus maybe thinking, he's a project, we got to go find somebody else?
Well, right now he's a gadget player to me. Now, he could be effective on those gadget plays, those end arounds, wide receiver sweeps, the occasional deep throw downfield off a play action or a play fake. But I think he could be a more consistent pass catcher in the slot. But of course, he is splitting snaps with Hunter Renfrow, who also plays in the slot. Devante Adams actually lines up in a slot a whole lot. Jacoby Myers is more of an outside wide receiver now, but he's also capable of lining up in the slot. So Trey Tucker has got to split all that time, and he's not an outside wide receiver, so he's very limited in that sense. So if you're looking at Trey Tucker and his long-term future, you're thinking, okay, is he just a gadget guy, or can he be our primary slot wide receiver? And this is why I said Hunter Renfrow's got a lot to prove, because he's competing with Trey Tucker in his future. Now, as far as Trey Tucker's concerned, if I'm looking at him as an incoming GM or head coach, I'm saying we're definitely not going to build our offense around him. He's a small slot wide receiver, but he can give us the explosive plays that we've been missing. The Raiders are at the bottom of the chart when it comes to explosive plays, and that's what Trey Tucker can specialize in for this offense. He's not going to get you 100 catches in the season, but you know what? He can average 20 yards per catch, and he can get those long passes down the field and open up the offense. I compared it to how John Gruden used Henry Ruggs III. Not to bring up Henry Ruggs III for what he did, but if you look at how Gruden used Ruggs, even when Ruggs wasn't going to get the ball, defenders had to respect his speed. And what did that do? That opened up the underneath routes for the tight ends, for the other wide receivers, and also the run game. The Raiders can do the same thing with Trey Tucker going forward. Defenders are going to have to respect his deep speed, and that can open it up for Devante Adams, Jacoby Myers, and everyone else, including Josh Jacobs, if he is the running back of the future. So I think Trey Tucker has to be more involved. I want to see him on the field for at least 40% of the snaps going forward.
Yeah, no, I 100%. And that's why I mentioned the speed in the last segment, because the Raiders need it. And it's not because you are necessarily going to have a quarterback that's throwing it 60, 70 yards in the air. I'm not saying they have to be an incredible vertical team. If you look at the NFL today, even the Dolphins, who have the longest touchdown passes of the season and clearly leading the league in all those stats, it's yards after catch, because you have Tua hitting people like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in the stride. Yes, their speed gets them in the open, but the passes aren't long. So the speed breaks it open, and it also opens up the running game, as you saw in Miami too this year. So I think that you're absolutely correct. Moving on the offensive line, Mo, you got a couple of young guys up there. You have Dylan Parham, obviously on the left side. On the right side, kind of in a rotational role, you've had Theo Munford Jr. Both guys have played pretty well, but I don't know that Parham maybe, but with Munford, he's shown great promise. But has he come along so much that you think, well, we have a long-term starter there?
As of right now, no. If I'm the Raiders, I'm definitely drafting another offensive tackle.
Yeah.
There, Munford, why he's been solid, he is not preventing me from drafting a top player at the position. If you remember, Peter King was in the Raiders draft war room, and the Raiders were interested in Paris Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State, who would have played right tackle. They were interested in Anton Harrison, who I believe went to the Jacksonville Jaguars out of Oklahoma.
Yep.
So they were interested in a couple of first-round offensive tackles. That lets you know what they thought about Jermaine Illuminar. They also gave him a modest deal. Now, I like Illuminar, but I understand that right now he doesn't look like the long-term starter at that position opposite Colton Miller. If you can upgrade it, you upgrade it, because right now, and I'm sure this is not going to stick, but right now they have a quarterback who's not naturally mobile. So when you have a quarterback who's less mobile, you need a strong offensive line. Now, I think the Raiders are going to have a different starter come week 1 of the 2024 season, but you still want to protect that quarterback, whoever that is, especially if it's a top 10, top 15 pick investment.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well said. We will skip Aiden O'Connell because we've talked ad nauseum about him over the last couple of weeks. You just mentioned a little bit about that, and we'll revisit that as we get further into the season. On the defensive side, you look up front too, and it starts up front, right? So you have Max Crosby, not a young player anymore, but with Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson, we said it. By mid-season, we wanted to see where he was. He's not there yet. Now, we also know, and this is not an excuse because I'm disappointed in Tyree Wilson thus far, but we also have seen a lot of reports about how the injury he had, the Liz Frank injury with the foot, all that, can take up to a year to recover. So I'm not willing to call him a bust. I am willing to say that he's been disappointing in year 1. Now, year 2, he's going to have to prove it. If he doesn't prove it and doesn't come along, I don't have a ton of optimism there, Mo, but I am leaving my mind open to him with a full training camp, with a full off season of treatment and workouts, giving him the chance to do that. The Raiders are gonna, because you have to. You drafted him 7th overall, and you're not going to cut him. But I do have concerns there about his long-term viability.
Definitely do have some concerns there, but like I said, anytime you bring in a new coach staff, you have to think brand new. So the way I'm looking at it is from a macro standpoint. And I know you mentioned Devante Adams, but anyone other than the Pro Bowlers or all pro players on the roster are not safe. Whether you have an injury history, you had a down year, you had some spots here where you were effective and then were not. You brought up Dylan Parham on the line. You brought up Jermaine Illuminar. Now, Dylan Parham, I think, actually could be a starter, but has he, like you asked me with Theo Munford, has Dylan Parham played good enough where you're thinking, we don't need an upgrade, we're good here, we could develop Dylan Parham into a starter for a decade plus? And I would say the answer to that is no. So even if Antonio Pierce stays and Champ Kelly stays, I think they have to reevaluate this roster, because if you look at the last 2 draft classes, hasn't been that good for the Raiders. So if you're Champ Kelly going into Mark Davis's office and you're pitching your plan long term, it has to be different than the plan that you had along with Dave Ziegler, because if you look at those last 2 draft classes, hasn't panned out very well.
No, and then the 3 in front of that, so it's 5 draft classes in a row, 3 really bad and 2 below average. So that's not good for your long-term viability as a championship team, and so you're absolutely correct there. Tell me about everybody else. We get back to, you talked about Divine Diablo in the last segment. I mean, I know he's not a rookie or a second-year player, but he is a guy young and coming into his own. We have to see what he can do over the last 5 games. Talk about, we got young guys in the backfield here, and this is where you get up and down with Nate Hobbs and Amik Robertson, of course, who's passed the rookie and sophomore stage, but still has played well. When you look at that young defensive backfield, who really has the most to prove heading into these last 5 games?
Even though he just joined the Raiders roster, I think Jack Jones has a lot to prove because, believe it or not, he's under contract with the Raiders through the 2025 season. So this is not doesn't have to be a one and done thing. And I pointed out during my Bleacher Report Live that he was the guy that stepped in when the Raiders after the Raiders benched Marcus Peters. So I think he's going to be the first in line to get that starting job opposite of Meek Robertson with Nate Hobbs in the slot. If he proves that he could be a solid starter as he did in New England as a rookie in 2022, I'm not saying that the Raiders pass on top cornerbacks, but then they're not in dire straits at that position because I also point out that Amik Robertson is going to be an unrestricted free agent this upcoming offseason. And I'm sure he's going to get some offers from other teams because he's having his best year. So it's not a guaranteed lock that Amik Robertson is going to be back with the Raiders in 2024. So they got to plan. They have to have a plan B for that. If they lose Amik Robertson, who are going to be your outside corners? Because Nate Hobbs, to me, in my opinion, is best in the slot. If you lose Amik Robertson and Jack Jones doesn't pan out, now you probably have to draft 2 cornerbacks because Ja'Cory Bennett hasn't shown he could be a full-time starter as of yet.
Yeah, he hasn't. I know he's had injury too. It's tough too when young guys get injured because the more football they play, the better you can address whether or not they're catching on, especially like a guy like Ja'Cory Bennett, who has times has looked good and other times has looked bad, but that's part of the rookie process. It's a hard position to play in the NFL with savvy receivers and when you're coming into the league. So we'll have to see how that goes. Who else? Anybody else I missed there? What about the safety position?
The safety position, to me, I wasn't a big fan of Marcus Epps. Has he been solid, decent? Yeah. But I think if your defense wants to step it up a notch, you need a playmaking safety that's going to be a ball hawk. Now, Trayvon Merrick has had a pretty good year and he stepped it up. But would you call him a ball hawking safety? I would say no. Say he's a solid young safety. And I think the Raiders have been forcing turnovers this year. But in order to sustain that, because I've watched the patterns of turnovers and takeaways, that can fluctuate. I don't know if you remember, Scott, the Raiders were like top 3 or top 2 in takeaways in 2016 when they went to the playoffs that year. And then it kind of fell off of a cliff. Turnovers come and go. But when you have a ball hawking safety or a ball hawking cornerback, typically you're going to be at least in the middle of a pack in that stat category. If the Raiders want to continue, their defense wants to continue to make strides, they got to continue to force turnovers because they still don't have enough talent yet to consistently get off the field on third downs and depend on that without the turnovers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One of the young guys that I think has proven himself, even though he's been underutilized, and I know people will say, well, it's because you're a Notre Dame fan, but I think Michael Mayer, because when I watch the All-22, Mo, I see his blocking, and it has gotten light years better than it was at the beginning of the year. He's done so much better in that, and that's huge, especially with Aiden O'Connell back there. He's not going to move around a lot, and he's a rookie too. I like what he's done there. They need to design more around him, but he's even being a decoy better than he used to. Like his route running has improved. I've seen over the course of the last 3 games as I've watched his play, and I think that is important. But the blocking, not just blocking and pass protection, but also in run opportunities as well. You see him getting out there and hitting blocks he wasn't hitting before.
I've seen the improvement in his blocking compared to early in the season. But what I do want to see is him get the ball more. Yes. Because that's why you draft a tight end in the second round, right? You don't draft a tight end in the second round because he blocks very well. You want that guy to contribute to your passing attack, and that was his strong suit at Notre Dame, and I would like to see the Raiders feature him more in the passing game. Forget about Austin Hooper. He's not the long-term future there. Jesper Horsted, we love you, but he's not a big part of the offense. He never was. No. You drafted Michael Mayer in the second round. You moved up in the second round for a reason. Get him more involved in the passing game because he can elevate that unit.
Now, I'm going to throw a wild card question at you before we hit the break and then go into our last segment where we'll preview the game with the Vikings. And that is Devante Adams. So much around the turmoil with Josh McDaniels and then his firing and then right after. So much has been focused on get him the ball. You got to get him the ball. You got to get him the ball, which I understand to a certain point. This next 5 games, he's said all the right things. And depending what happens, who the coach is, what they do at quarterback next year in the draft or free agency, because they could, They could go get a free agent instead of drafting a guy. I'm just saying. If that happens, what do you want to see from him the last few weeks of the season?
Devante Adams, and I think we may have slightly different views here. I think I don't want to say Devante Adams is untouchable, but in no way, if I'm a GM coming in, do I want to trade arguably, well, not arguably, but my best player on offense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just under no circumstances I'm doing that. There's nothing that Devante Adams can or can't do to convince me that the Raiders should just offer him up for trade, unless you're giving me, a top 2 pick to get Devante Adams. Then, of course, if you're giving me a deal I can't refuse, then I have to, of course, think about that. But barring that, like Devante Adams, to me, what I want to see from him is just be a leader. And that's not a production thing. That's not something on the field. Just be a leader, even with, if the Raiders lose the next 5, lose the next 4 or 5. I just want to see Devante Adams continue to be that leader in the locker room, because as the Raiders rebuild this roster, they're still going to need their leadership core in place, especially if you're not going to resign Josh Jacobs, who's been a captain. So I just want to see Max and Devante continue to be the leaders they have been all this whole time.
And I agree 100% on that one. And I think with Devante Adams, the key has nothing to do with the next 5 games. I think the key for him, because I think you're right. I wouldn't want to trade him. I wouldn't try to trade him unless somebody knocks on my door with, like you said, an offer you can't refuse. You always have to entertain those. Yeah. But he may not want to stay. I know he does now, and he said all the right things. But depending what the decision around the coaching staff, depending on what they do, just like they did last year, right? They asked him, and I think he begrudgingly decided to support what was going on, and it turned into a disaster. And clearly he was communicating that as we went through, and it didn't sound like what Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler told him was going to happen happened. And I think that was probably the Tom Brady thing, by the way. But to me, if I'm Devante Adams, I'm waiting to see what you do, Raiders, before I decide whether or not I start going to you not in a confrontational way in the offseason, say, hey, listen, guys, I see what you're doing here. I accept it. I get it. But yeah, it's not for me. So trade me, whatever. Now, doesn't mean he'll be traded, but clearly I think that Devante Adams, you're right. To me, you don't get rid of your best player. I think the old adage, and I think it was Bill Walsh who said this, if I'm reading back a book I read about his time with the 49ers, Bill Walsh used to say this, and this is the mistake that Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler made. It's not Devante Adams' fault at all. And I think we all got blinded by it because he's such a great player. And that is a team that does not have everything else in order. The last thing you should trade for when you have needs, meaning the last piece you need, is a top-notch wide receiver. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. If you think about it, you need offense, defensive line, you need a quarterback, you need all the other skill positions. And then if you have the ability to go out and get a guy like Devante Adams, you get him because it's the last piece in the puzzle. You got it all locked in, and now, boom, you go. The Raiders did it backwards. They just did it backwards. And instead they went and got Jimmy Garoppolo, who couldn't even get the ball to the guy. So that's not his fault, though. But they are where they're at. And if they can start to build around him in the time he's got left, and they do it the right way, I think Devante Adams will be happy, right? Even if it means that next year isn't a 10-win season, as long as they're going in the right direction, they got the young guy at the quarterback position or whatever, then I think so. I think it's up to the Raiders on this one. I think the Raiders need to prove to him something over the next 5 games and really in the offseason.
So you're flipping the table and saying he's got to put the Raiders on the clock. He's like, show me what your plan is, not just for the last 5 weeks, but going into the offseason to convince me that I should finish my career here. And I think that's a very good point, because even though Raider fans are going to hate us talking about this, if he's not happy and he sees that his career is on the back 9, he wants to win football games and he doesn't see the Raiders going anywhere, you can't rule out him saying, hey, I want to play my last 2 to 3 years with a contender because it's not working out here. Regardless of that, and I understand, we're not saying he wants out now. He said all the right things. He said he wants to be here. He said he wants to see it out. That's right now. But as we all know, things change over time. Who are the Raiders going to hire as a head coach? Who are the Raiders going to hire as a general manager could affect how he feels about his direction with the team.
Right. And he is a generational player. He's probably, I'm going to say, 3 years left, maybe 4, right? Depends. And so if I'm that guy and I've been that good, I want to win. Okay. So if you do something and I think, man, this isn't it, then I would respect it. And it doesn't have to be acrimonious. It could be straightforward. Just say, hey, look, I love being a Raider. Always wanted to be a Raider. I was a Raider and I always will be, but I want to go win. And you guys are now doing this. And so I'm going to have to do that. Hopefully it doesn't happen. Listen, I hope for fans it doesn't happen. I hope for him it doesn't happen because, you don't want to uproot your family all the time. But certainly I agree. You said it the best, which is I think he's got to put the Raiders on notice and say, show me what you got.
All right. And he has that type of leverage too, because as you say, he's arguably the best wide receiver in the game. So
yes,
if he wants out, teams are going to line up for him.
That's correct. 100%. Absolutely. All right. That's going to do it for that discussion. We're going to come back. We got a little bit of time left here on the show, 6 or 7 minutes, I think it is. We're going to take this quick break. When we come back here on the Bet in Las Vegas and also Odyssey Original Podcast, we're going to go over the game. Yes, the Vikings versus the Raiders. We'll talk a little bit about this matchup and who has the edge here as we move along here on Silver and Black today. It's Mo, it's Scott. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, home stretch here on Silver and Black today on the Bet in Las Vegas. If you're listening to us on the radio, if you're listening to us on our original Odyssey Sports Podcast, we certainly appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get it. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you for the subscribe and hitting that notifications bell as the chat continues to be great in there. All right, Mo, the game against the Vikings coming up on Sunday at Allegiant Stadium. We look at the Vikings 6-6. Boy, you and I were talking about before we started the show. If you look at, as you can hear in my notes, if you look at the Vikings, I'm going to start with them. The Vikings schedule, after they play the Raiders at 1:05 p.m. on Sunday, they then go to Cincinnati, which suddenly has some hope with the way Jake Browning played the other night. Then they have to play the Lions on Christmas Eve, the Packers on New Year's Eve, and then the Lions again the next week. They have to play the Lions 2 of the next 3 weeks, along with the hot Packers, the Packers who are playing themselves into playoff position in the NFC. This seems to be, for me, when I look at it, the Vikings got to be looking at this game and saying, look, the last 4 weeks are going to be tough, including 2 road games, one against the AFC runner-up and then one against one of the hottest teams in the league, which is the Detroit Lions. They got to come into Las Vegas thinking, we got to win this game.
Absolutely, and I know Raider fans aren't going to want to hear this, but the Vikings are probably looking at this game as if this is the easiest game on our remaining schedule. Not an easy game, not that the Raiders are a tomato can, but compared to the opponents that you just read off, and I know the Raiders beat the Packers early in the season, but if you've been paying attention to the Packers and Jordan Love, they've been rolling in recent weeks. They're on a hot streak. So if you're looking at this, if you're the Vikings, look at the schedule, you're saying we have to go on a road, coming out of a bye week, by the way, just like the Raiders are. And we have to make this game count because we got to face the division leader twice. We got to play another division game. So if you're the Vikings, you're thinking this team has scored less than 18 points in 3 consecutive games. I know we have a backup quarterback without Kirk Cousins, but we have Justin Jefferson coming back off of an injury. We have Jordan Addison, who's been an impressive first round rookie. Yep. We should be able to put up points on this Raider defense and get the win and get back over 500.
Yep, exactly. And that's how you got to look at it. And then you look on the other side of the fence, and that's the Raiders also, their schedule, where we looked at the back of the schedule and said, well, yeah, the Chiefs, the Chargers, okay. But the Vikings, the Colts, the Broncos have surged, as you guys all know, what they've been able to do. And they play them. They finish up the season in what will be a flexed game of some sort on the 6th or 7th. We don't have determination on when it'll play, but they got to go to Chargers on a short week, by the way. They host the Chargers in Las Vegas after the Vikings on Thursday Night Football this coming week. And then they get a longer week, and they get to play on Monday night. So they get one of those things they call a mini bye, right, between the 14th and the 25th. So they play on Christmas Day against the Chiefs. And then the Colts, who are playing themselves into the AFC South race, or at least the AFC wildcard race. So the Raiders don't have a cakewalk either. And so if you look at this Minnesota Vikings game, with the exception of maybe, even though the Colts are hot, you look at the Colts and you go, okay, how far can they continue? This also is a game like they're saying, okay, we got to win this game because this is one of the games that I think we're more evenly matched in and matched up well against the Vikings.
Not only that, but you're looking at this game, if you're the Raiders and thinking if we fall to 5-8, you could start to fire out the mock drafts, right? Because if you drop the 5-8 with the Chiefs still on your schedule on Christmas. Now, I know the Chiefs aren't the same juggernaut team they were in the past, but they did spank the Raiders not too long ago, right? So you have to remember that if you fall to 5-8, then your focus kind of shifts to a full evaluation mode, as I call it. And we talked about it in the second segment. That at that point, you're not that winning is not important, but you understand that your slim playoff hopes are probably not going to pan out. So you have to look at a lot of the young guys. You probably see a lot of younger players play in those last 4 games. If the Raiders lose this game and lose embarrassingly, even if they lose this game, you probably see a little more young players in those last 4 games in evaluation mode. But if you're the Raiders, I hate to say must win. But if you're one of those people who say the Raiders have a chance to make the playoffs, this is a must win game for you.
Yeah, and you look at what the Vikings on defense, they're last in the league in sacks. They have 16 takeaways. That's two more than the Raiders. They're -8 in differential. The Raiders are -7. So the Vikings defense is not overall spectacular, but they're not terrible. I would put them a little bit ahead of the Raiders, but they do give up a ton of yards. They give up more yards on defense than the Raiders do per game. Is 350 to 343. Passing, again, also encouraging. They give up an average of 258.6 a game, and they give up 92 on the ground. The Raiders, unfortunately, give up 127. You were talking about Madison and what he's been able to do. So you look at that, and the rushing. On rushing defense, the Vikings give up on average just below 100 yards. The Raiders gain about 82. So this is going to be another Josh Jacobs game, I would imagine, that they're going to have to get the ball to him, establish the run, get some pressure off Aiden O'Connell, get him to distribute the ball much like he did the last game, but do it consistently instead of kind of reverting back into conservative mode and not letting him throw the ball. And that doesn't mean long. That means just getting the ball out quickly, getting the ball in the middle of the field, getting it to Michael Mayer, getting it to Jacoby Myers, getting it to all of his weapons, and really spreading the ball around.
Now, I'm not saying I would get away from the run game, but I would still test the Vikings' young secondary. They
Mm-hmm.
drafted a guy to USC that I really like their cornerback in Mekhi Blackman. Byron Young is there after some time in Arizona. Now, the secondary is better. The Viking secondary is better now than it was early in the season. But you got Devante Adams. And I talked about Jacoby Myers having a great year with the Raiders being their best offseason acquisition on offense or maybe overall. I think you have to give those guys a chance, especially if they're in one-on-one situations, to beat the Vikings corners, and I think that could be the key to the game. Again, you're gonna have arguably the two best wide receivers in the game on the field at the same time. I know Dolphins fans are screaming at me about Tyreek Hill, who's in the MVP conversation. By the way, he's not gonna win it. That's a quarterback award. But you're arguably gonna have two of the
Which is
best wide
wrong.
receivers. You're right. You're gonna have arguably the two best wide receivers in the game on the field, not at the same time, but alternating drives. So I think the Raiders, not that they get caught up in that wide receiver battle, but I think they're going to like their matchups on the outside with Devante Adams and Jacoby Myers against the Vikings corners.
Absolutely. Okay, so give me your prediction. Don't have to give me a score. You can give me a score if you want, but who wins this game?
Raider fans are going to hate me for saying this.
You're whispering to yourself. You gotta say it out loud. You're like,
Raider fans are gonna hate me. They're gonna hate me for that's why I whispered it because they're gonna hate me for saying this. I put out my Bleacher Report NFL picks on Thursday, early Thursday. Check those out. It's on X. I tweeted it, posted it, whatever you want to call it. I have the Vikings winning 24-20. The Raiders not scoring 20 points in 3 consecutive games kind of worries me going against Brian Flores. I have my question marks about Brian Flores as a head coaching candidate, but he can coach a defense. And I think he's going to give Aiden O'Connell some problems. Not just what people are going to assume that, he's going to blitz because that's been a hallmark of his defense, but he's shown that he's willing to back off of that if need be. So I would say if you're Aiden O'Connell, expect the unexpected. You may get cover zero. You may not get cover zero. You may get a defense that plays man press. You expect the unexpected from Brian Flores because he's very good at mixing it up. And I would say that being with Aiden O'Connell's inexperience and Brian Flores' ability to dial up things between the blitz and non-blitzing schemes, it worries me for the Raiders offense that hasn't scored a lot of points in recent weeks. So with the Vikings attacking possibly that Raiders interior with Alexander Madison, who you mentioned, and Ty Chandler, who's one of my fantasy football sleepers, by the way, I think those guys are going to be a little too much for the Raiders to keep up with offensively.
I think that's a fair assessment. I'm going the other way, Mr. Moton. You ready for this? I know people will be surprised because they're like, because I'm realistic usually. But I think the off week, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt here to the Raiders coming up with an offensive game plan that is going to push the envelope. Okay, like you said, you got to go balls out now. The conservative crap doesn't work. It's not going to help you right now with 5 games to go. So I think the Raiders win this game on a field goal, 27-24. Yeah, they're going to score 27 points. First time they scored 30. That was the one other time. But I think the key to this is, and I'm calling it right now, so you guys can make fun of me if I'm wrong. I like what you said. I think they're going to have to run the ball, and they will early, but that will open up the pass. And I think Aiden O'Connell has his best game as a pro. And I think you're right. I think he gets Jacoby Myers. I think Jacoby Myers has a touchdown. I think Devante Adams has a touchdown. You add in the next touchdown, a Josh Jacobs close one in the red zone, and Daniel Carlson wins it for them late in the game. But it's going to be close. And they have to have a couple things bounce their way. I think Josh Dobbs, I love the story. Good dude. I wish him the best. I think the clock strike midnight, and I think the Raiders are going to have a good game against them, even with Jefferson back. I think they're going to have the upper hand there. So I'm picking the Raiders. How about that?
Here's what I'll say about this. And one thing we didn't mention, this could be a Daniel Carlson revenge game if you have him kicking the game-winning field goals. Remember, the Vikings drafted him and gave up on him quickly, and he winds up with the Raiders. So that could be a narrative that gets played up. Of course, we're going to talk about kickers too much. But I think if the Raiders win the way it would look like, and we both talked about it, I think it would have to be a big Devante Adams game. Again, not that they go away from the run, but the Vikings are better against the run than they are against the pass.
Right.
And I think Devante Adams is going to have a big game, and or Jacoby Myers. Maybe Hunter Renfrow gets sprinkled in there. Maybe we see Trey Tucker after the Raiders had a week off to kind of regroup. Maybe we see Trey Tucker catch multiple big Michael Mayer. Maybe we see both those guys catch multiple big passes down the field. And again, the Raiders get those explosive plays. They got a shot to beat the Vikings. I also think it's going to be close. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a blowout.
No.
So I think these teams are more evenly matched than other people think.
100%.
But if the Raiders win, they're going to have a big game from one of their pass catchers or multiple of their pass catchers.
And the quarterback, Aiden O'Connell's got to have a really good game. Turnover free, obviously, but he's also got to make passes, right? He's got to have his quick release, which he's been pretty good at. But what I want to see the Raiders do, and sometimes it's taken away, and I get it with coverage, but you got to use the middle of the field, man. Use the middle of the field and get yards. Get chunk yards here and there. Don't just go vertically down the sideline. Try to take what you can get over the middle. Get 5 yards, get 8 yards, get 10 yards, and then hit the big one. Like you said, hit the big one to Devante or hit the big one to Jacoby Myers or Trey Tucker coming across. So yeah, I think it'll be a fun game. And I don't, like you said, these teams are pretty evenly matched in many ways. And so we'll see how it all rolls out, but it'll be fun. Mo, I know you have a Bleacher Report lives before and after the game, correct?
At this point in the season, just after the game.
Just after
the game. When the Raiders are on prime time, then I'm on before it. This being not a prime time game, just on after, which is fine with me. I usually chop it up with fans before the game, see how they're feeling about the Raiders, what their temperature is, or their confidence level is in the team going into the game. I haven't been on the X very much this past week. Been busy, been handling some things. A lot of people will say, wow, you probably were just buying a bunch of crap because your background looks different. But I was doing more than that.
I was watching. He's got a new set.
I was doing more than that over the past week. And with Raider Nation, it seems like a lot of people are just looking forward to the draft. I don't want to say they're checked out of the season yet because there's slim hopes there. But there's more excitement for who are they going to draft at quarterback versus winning the next game. I know that's not for all fans. I'm not saying that's all fans, but from the people that I've talked to, it's more about, okay, yeah, we got the Vikings, but who are we going to draft in the first round 2024 to replace Aiden O'Connell and be our quarterback? Because the Raiders fans are starving for a franchise quarterback. And what I will say is, while this is not something to look forward to because it's already out, I put an article out on Sportsnot And I titled it that the Raiders have to revamp or modernize the archaic quarterback room that Josh McDaniels built. He has
Yeah.
3 quarterbacks who aren't natural movers. And I think the Raiders have to add not just one quarterback, but 2 more quarterbacks to catch up with the times, because Josh McDaniels' idea of the ideal quarterback is very outdated. Remember, he had most of his success with Tom Brady, who's a pocket passing quarterback, and he got Jimmy Garoppolo, who's not very mobile. You got Aiden O'Connell, who can't move very much, and you got Brian Hoyer, who's 58 years old. No offense, Scott,
He's
but I
older than me.
mean,
Yeah.
you have to modernize the quarterback room, and I think that's a lot of fans are
You
focused on. But
and
I
it
will say this game is going to be entertaining with the Vikings.
yeah, and it blows my mind though. I was right before we got on the show. I was going back and forth with one of our listeners. We were disagreeing vehemently about mobile quarterbacks. He copied you on it too. It's like 8 of the 9 last quarterbacks were pocket. And I'm like, they're all gone. They're gone. Brady's gone, right? All those pocket passers are gone. So you can say, well, 8 of the last 9 have not been mobile quarterbacks. It doesn't matter. Things change on a dime, my man. Things change, and the NFL has changed. If you look at the top 10 quarterbacks right now, one you could qualify as a pocket passer, right? Which is Goff. And even he moves better than an Aiden O'Connell. He's not a big mobile quarterback, but he moves more than a Tom Brady or a Jimmy Garoppolo. So, again, people confuse. Well, quarterbacks that run, that's different than being mobile. Patrick Mahomes is not a running quarterback, but he's a mobile quarterback, right? Tua, not a running quarterback, although he can run occasionally. He is a mobile quarterback. Out of the pocket, with your legs, create things down the field. That's what you do. If people don't see that, I can't help you. Come back in 2 years and tell me I'm right.
I like the Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow comparisons when you talk about mobile versus running quarterbacks. They're
Yes.
not running quarterbacks. They're not Lamar Jackson, and Lamar Jackson's not a running quarterback either. But what I mean by running quarterback is those guys aren't going to burn you for 20 yards downfield and juke you. Lamar Jackson, he can do that, right? But Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence, they can move when necessary.
Right.
They don't rely on it, but when necessary, they can do it. And with Aiden O'Connell, is when it's necessary for him to move, he's not very good at
Right.
it. So the
And,
Raiders need to add some athleticism to their quarterback room.
and a key
My point.
distinction, Mo, is that, yes, when you are a mobile quarterback, you still have to throw well from the pocket. No question. Right? So if you are I talked to Dr. David Chow, I did a story up on Sportsnaut about injuries, quarterback injuries. And he brought up the good point. He's like, look, I was in the NFL for 17 years. He worked with Phillip Rivers. He worked with a couple of the LA quarterbacks. He said, those guys were freaking statues. They didn't run. They got the ball out quick. But as the game, he said, now the game's changed. Like you cannot be a pure pocket passer anymore. You just can't. So it's amazing that people are holding on to, and they look back at the Super Bowl record and say, Tom Brady, Tom Brady, Tom Brady. And Tom Brady won freaking 6 of 7 that he was in. Okay. So that's one guy. But again, you can't do it anymore. It changed the way the offenses, the way the defenses are playing now. You just can't do it anymore. Doesn't mean there won't be outliers. There's always outliers. Always guys who can do it. Now, I had the conversation on our Sportsnaut show before we go, and I'm extending the show now, and I'm sorry to do that, but I had the conversation with Ryan Dyrud from the LA Football Network, and I said, you have to develop, like if you have a more pocket passer as your backup who can come in and spell a guy who's out for a game or whatever, that's fine. I'm not saying you can't have an Aiden O'Connell, for example, as a guy that you go to in a tough situation, because he could still win a game for you. It's just not optimal in today's league to be a statue, okay? That's the point. So there will always be pocket passers, less athletic guys. But if you're going to win and be the next Kansas City or the next Cincinnati or the next Jacksonville, you've got to have a guy who can do it.
Right. So just to put a bow on my point is there are mobile quarterbacks who can evade pressure if necessary. And there are unicorns out there, mobile quarterbacks who can run, like Lamar Jackson, like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, who put on a little weight recently, a little bulkier, not as mobile as he used to be, but still he could get you for 20 yards, 25 yards down the field. Those are, I would say, Lamar Jackson being the prime example, those are outliers. But you just want to have the tools to be able to move if your offensive line breaks down for whatever reason. If you want to bring up the Tom Brady situation with his teams, Tom Brady has always had a pristine offensive line. That's just
Always.
not the reality in today's league. And my buddy Sobo, Brent Sobleski of Bleacher Report, talks about this almost every week. The offensive line play is not as good as it used to be 20 years ago because there are less physical practices. And that goes back to the collective bargaining agreement. So there are some fundamental reasons why offensive lines aren't performing as good as they used to, and that's why you need a mobile quarterback.
And that's a really great point by Brett, because not only is it because of the lack of contact in practices, it also is two other things in my view. One is, if you look at the college game and the sets they have in college versus the pro passing sets in the NFL, they don't have the same sets. They don't have it. It's just not, they don't get the familiarity with it. But number two is the fact that if you look at the offensive linemen in these offenses now, going back when you were just still in diapers and I was watching football, Mo, the more traditional pocket passers day, right? You had your offensive line, and then guess what? You had a tight end who didn't catch passes. They were an extra blocker. Oh, and then you had a fullback, right? Because you didn't have 4 or 5 wideouts or 4 or 5 people in routes going out and spread offenses. You didn't have it. So guess what other guys did? They didn't go out on passes. They blocked. So not only is offensive line fall playing, just like Brett said, it's also the offenses, you have less protection, which is why you also need a mobile quarterback. So it's all intertwined when you look at the modern NFL.
I just want to make it clear, we're not crapping on Aiden O'Connell because I said exactly what you just said in my Sports Not piece. It's fine to have an Aiden O'Connell as a spot starter, as a backup quarterback. There is a place for that in today's league. Backup quarterbacks are valuable in the NFL. We're seeing all the quarterback injuries. Look at Joe Burrow. Trevor Lawrence had a nasty injury. Deshaun Watson's out in Cleveland, even though they look like a Super Bowl roster. So you need that backup quarterback who could be a spot starter and be a pocket passer and deliver the ball accurately. That's valuable. But as you said, it's just not optimal in today's offenses.
It's not optimal. And like you said about Tom Brady, if Aiden O'Connell had the best line in the NFL, then exactly. you could stick with him. I mean, if you had a line that was pristine like Brady had when he was with the Patriots, then Aiden O'Connell's going to be successful no matter what. So again, there's always outliers, and you can be successful in that position, although you limit the type of offense you can run. And so as defenses get smarter and faster and stronger, guess what happens? You become at a disadvantage. So you have to go with the way that the league is going, and that's the way it's going. Whether you like it or not, it just is. So you can come back and tell us we're right later. Mo, all right, man, that's going to close it out for this show. We appreciate you guys being with us. Make sure you subscribe wherever you can. If you're listening to us on the radio in Las Vegas, just want to reiterate our condolences and sending out our prayers to my alma mater, UNLV, the whole community there, and of course to those that lost their lives and their families. Will be on my mind as that was a place where I grew up, met my wife, you name it, and my son goes there now currently too. So our best out to everybody in Las Vegas, to UNLV. Of course, having to go through 2 things like this, including October 1st back in the day, is not good. So you will be all in our thoughts here. But for everyone here, including our producer, Mike Rabier, for Moe Moton, I'm Scott Gulbransen. This has been Silver and Black Today. We will see you guys next time. Take care.